Hello YouTube, Manny Beal here. How are you doing? This is part 9 of my review series on UPB, Universally Preferable Behaviour, a book by Stefan Molyneux, where I deconstruct the contents from start to finish, as far as I can manage, and give my comments and my philosophical thoughts about it, and potentially, ultimately, my final judgment on whether or not what the author sets out to do has been obtained. And I might just add that, of course, as you can hear, English is my second language, or at least not my first language, which is Danish. But I feel that I'm sufficiently, that's the word I was looking for, I'm sufficiently versed in both in making some coherent statement or coherent talk that is understandable for you, and I am sufficiently versed in the terms used in philosophy, and I can connect them or compare them to other terms with the same meaning and so on. But still, there are a few times here and there where listening to the review or the video part afterwards, I can hear that I'm sort of struggling to find the word, and maybe I know the word, but it won't arrive, because if you know that feeling, right? It's on the tongue, as it says, as they say in Danish, but it won't get out. So I excuse for this kind of small problem there is. It's not a problem as such, but at times it can be slightly difficult to understand what I'm saying. So, and in that case, I encourage you to write a note or comment below the videos, and then I'll get back to you if there's some sort of important meaning of what I'm trying to say that escapes you because you don't understand what I'm saying. Well, please ask, or you can send a message to Manny Beal on Discord. I presume that's how you can get in contact me directly on Discord, if I'm not mistaken. But otherwise, you have to lecture me on how Discord works. At least there's a Discord, there's a Manny Beal server on Discord. You can join a discussion and comments about the various parts of the deconstruction, and I invite everybody to join in and discuss this sort of important kind of philosophical work. Even though I hesitate to take these words in my mouth, I'll have to admit that it has philosophical approach, and it attempts to, or at least it says it attempts to solve the biggest question in human history, when in regards to philosophy, at least, right? And I regard philosophy as the most important kind of endeavor a human being can set itself on, or set itself to. And within that, the most important aspect, or the most needed thing to get a consensus around, is ethics. I would say, with regards to importance of various aspects of philosophy, the starting point is always the most important. And as you progress on in your philosophy, the next part becomes less important, because the one before was important for that importance to arrive, right? So getting a grip on metaphysics is absolutely mandatory, right? And then epistemology to establish what knowledge is, and then sort of you could say that a second part of epistemology is establishing objectivity, and from that you go into ethics and so on, right? But and that's another one of these problems with UPB. And I have made a little sort of what's it called, resume of what we have done in UPB so far, and I'm pointing out various things. It's quite hard. I'm trying my best to find something to say, this is really good philosophy. This is there's something here that is enlightening me, right? There are insights here that when you read Hume's Isord Gap, you're like, holy crap, nobody has seen that for 2,000 years. And then this guy comes along and say, wait, he's basically pulling the rock out under all ethicists, right, or ethical philosophers, by stating Hume's is-ought gap, right? These kind of insights, I'm not expecting necessarily this level of destruction, quote, but it's hard for me to find something where I say, well, this is great, right? What I can find is a lot of problems. So, and I won't find just something just to say, well, there's also good things. It has to be really good for me to say, well, this is brilliant, right? I can only find bad stuff. I'm sorry, but there's so much bad stuff that I had to focus on that and not looking for sort of good stuff, right? Okay, so first of all, there are no standout definitions of anything except truth, I should mention, right? And I'll get back to that. There are no standout definitions. He deliberately says, I'm not going to define anything implicitly by saying there are terms like, what was it? I don't remember exactly. Reality was one of them. I think 3 terms, just sort of arbitrarily chosen terms that seems less important than other terms that might have been mentioned as something you wouldn't want to define, right? You're not defining anything. I mean, it's ridiculous to have. I mean, you don't have to define every single word you're using, right? No, but a selection, an ability to be able to see that this is an important term that needs a definition, particularly when you bring in new terms that are not necessarily used in philosophy, like airtight, right? An airtight argument or whatever it was. I'm not even sure what an airtight compliance, I think it was. What the hell is that? Are you just joking? Are you being, trying to be funny or what? I mean, philosophy about ethics or morality is not something you're being funny about, right? A few mentions of things that have a funny, sort of more loose arguments, but when you're talking about, truth and false and knowledge and so on, you're not bringing in funny quotes, right? So terms are used to equate different meanings. I'm not sure if I think there have been a few equivocations, but I'm not sure about, but I'm pretty sure there are equatings, which is sort of my way of putting it. I'm not sure if that's, a known term to use, but if you have 2 different words for the same meaning, you are equating the meanings of those words, but because they're 2 different words, people might think, or I might think, that you are talking about 2 different things while you are not. And if you don't define things, how the hell will I know what you're talking about, really, right? And then again, new terms are brought in regularly without any explanation. They just arrive in a sentence and then they seem to be important, but there's no necessary understanding except the understanding that I can bring myself. That is a kind of manipulation, right? And then the terms in the title are attached to aspects of philosophy that already have well-defined terms and must be seen as a tool for manipulation. What I'm saying is that if you bring in new terms and you don't define them, then you're sort of taking control of terms that are usually used for the same thing in other kinds of philosophical discussions. Then why are you bringing in that new term if people are already using well-known terms, right? And if you at some later point bring in those other terms, how am I going to understand the first term, right? And this is another kind of, I have to see as a manipulation, right? If you bring in a new term, you're in control of the meaning of that term. And that's one of the biggest critique points I have, is that when you bring in that term which is used in your definition of ethics, you're trying to prove ethics by using your own terms, right? I'm going to prove that this is a bulubulup, and it contains a boop bululut dududut. and here I have a budulut and a dudulut and a lut, and therefore I have a budulut, right? You haven't proved anything. You have just used your own terms to combine to your own term, and then you say, aha, I solved the problem. There's no explanation of how various references to mind, reality, world, etc. relate to each other. How do I understand when you say the real world or reality, objective reality, subjective reality, subjective world, and objective mind and subjective mind? And how do all these sort of realms? You also used the term realm. I might add that. I should actually put that in here. It's a PDF. All these terms that sort of points to some realm, area, or an aspect, sort of where certain things are in your experience. How do they relate? When do I know what you're talking about in relation to my own experience? It doesn't hang together, right? Okay, then the definition of truth or truths is extremely convoluted and complex. And at the same time, 3 other definitions of truth has been mentioned earlier and later after that other definition of truth, without any reference to this other definition. In other words, you have started with 3 definitions of truth, right? Or at least 3 references to some kind of truth. And then you make the big definition of truth, which is extremely convoluted and quite possibly impossible to understand. And then you sort of start to talk about these 3 other definitions of truth again, without relating to that big definition of truth. What the hell is going on with this truth thing, right? And then you also talk about truth seems to be switching constantly between being subjective and objective. That might not be the case, but that's the sense I get when I read it. And then you're going to say, but that's your subjective understanding. Well, when I have my subjective understanding, that's the only understanding of your book that I can have, right? Everything is subjective unless we agree upon it on some objective agreement. So to me, it seems everything is floating, and what you're trying to do is you're throwing everything up in the air, and then you're going to grab, universally preferable behavior and say, see, I found them, right? A lot of terms are being referred to as being objective, while it is ridiculous to call anything but objects potentially objective. In other words, elephant, bicycle, sandwich, moon, North American beardless dude can exist. But criteria, method, truth, debate, preference, etc. cannot exist. So this distinction between subjective and objective, even if you attach the word objective or subjective, seems to float anyway, even though you try to somehow, to some extent, to differentiate. And yet you are using these terms left and right in completely confusing manner. So nobody has any clue when we are talking about something objective and subjective. And even if we could separate the terms, we wouldn't know what the difference between subjective and objective is because we haven't defined them. So what I see when I have, from so far what I've read, the trick is this. 1, define ethics as universally preferable behavior. Keep talking about objective, since people fear this realm as a kind of authority. When you talk about this is objective, people say, okay, I'm sorry, Steph, I'm only subjective, so you must be right because you're the big chatty forehead, big Steph philosopher. So I'm only subjective. Yes, of course, if you say it's objective, it's subjective. 3, keep attaching universal, preferred, and behavior to already well-known aspects of objectivity. 4, connect the dots. Combine universal, preferred and behavior and get, ta-da, 5, universally preferred behavior. 6, the beast is down, quote, not. Okay, so much for my little resume of what has been going on so far. And let's take the next part of the book, which is universally preferred behavior. As I said, now he's just combining the words he has been throwing around until now. I'm poisoning the well, I know, but holy shit, right? As a result of the above arguments, we can see that it is impossible to enter any debate without accepting the premise that certain behaviors are universally preferable. Well, you haven't defined what a behavior is. If I'm going to differentiate, behavior is a kind of action. It has to do with action. So what's the difference between behavior and action? Well, in my book, behaviors are certain categories of actions. A behavior could be eating, it could be sleeping, it could be walking, it could be thinking, it could be driving a car, and so on, right? But that kind of category does not refer to any object, because it's not a particular car you're driving. It's not a particular banana or any kind of food you're eating, right? It's not in a particular bed you're sleeping, right? There's no particular object you are referring to when you're using behavior. So behavior, by definition, cannot possibly be any kind of objective because it doesn't refer to an object, right? And since it's not an object, it's a category. So it can't be universally. I can't prefer a category, right? And universally, what is universal about sleeping? What is it? What is that universal thing? You haven't defined it. And preferable, what does that mean? Is it that I like sleeping? I have to sleep. I'm going to sleep. There's only one way to sleep, and that is sleeping. I don't prefer to sleep. I do it because I need to, right? It's this word manipulation. It gets fucking annoying, right? It's really, I have this manipulation sensor, right? That I immediately get this going. I'm in the red in this manipulation sensor quote, right? It's really bad. I mean, it's unbelievably bad. This is such a disgrace. It's a disgrace to call this philosophy. It's a disgrace. You are a blemish on the idea of philosophy, right? It's a disgusting piece of garbage. Okay, with that rant out of the way, I use the word behavior here rather than thought because it is important to differentiate between purely internal and unverifiable states such as thinking from objective and verifiable states such as acting, writing, and speaking. What? So now you're doing what I said you would do. You are slapping behavior on something because you need that word to be there, rather than thought. Thinking, it's unverifiable. So I can verify if you're thinking when you write this. This could just be, a monkey tapping on a typewriter. So is this based on your subjective thinking or what? I mean, it's unverifiable. So your thinking, when your thinking enters up in your arm and you press your keyboard or wherever where these words has appeared from, it's unverifiable. Acting, writing, so writing is objective, but the thinking you need to do to create the writing is unverifiable. So what happens from thinking out in your fingers and then on a computer? Is that because you can go and watch words on a screen that it suddenly becomes objective. But it's my thoughts that I am recreating in a so-called language. A language, a text is not objective. At most, it can refer to something that is objective, right? You can verify that according to the convention of alphabet, it's the letters of the alphabet that has been used, but that is not an objective. That is a conformity to some, technique. It's bullshit, right? It is impossible to prove that I have dreamt of an elephant last night. Yes. I mean, nobody knows what you're dreaming, even if you say you're dreaming of an elephant. So the only one who has access to your dreams is you. And when you wake up from that dream, the dream is no longer there, right? Then you only have a memory, potentially, of that dream. So you can't prove that you had an elephant, dream of an elephant, right? You only have a memory of a dream of an elephant. That's not the same as the dream, right? So what you have is a memory of a dream of an elephant. Why would I want to prove that, right? I don't give a crap about your elephant dreams, right? It is possible to prove that I have written the word elephant, which is why I use the word behavior rather than thought. It is possible to prove that I have written the word elephant. Yes, but that doesn't, you can write elephant all you want. There is no elephant. There is only the literal reference to an object that could be the case, right? It's not objective because you've written elephant. You could be lying about, if you say, I am, I am experiencing elephant, that is true to me. Well, so what? I can't see the elephant, right? So it's false to me. So that doesn't help anything, right? Which is why I use the word behavior rather than thought. How nice that you need to exchange thinking with behavior. That's so, it's incredible how it, converges toward the big term universally preferable behavior. So it's not manipulative at all. No. Acquiescing to superior logic in an argument is an action. No. Yeah, it's an action. The action is that you are, if you're expressing it with your mouth or in words, you are making sounds. The action is you make sound. The argument is an interpretation of the sounds, right? If every time I conceded a point to you, I said nothing, but rather just stared at you blankly, you would find it rather irritating to debate me. I have to read that. If every time I conceded a point to you, I said nothing, but rather just stared at you blankly, you would find it rather irritating. How do you know what I will feel? How do you know? To concede a point, I must perform the action of verbal acquiescence. Yeah, sure. Thus, it can be seen that inherent in the very acting of arguing are a number of embedded premises that cannot be conceivably overturned. Embedded premises. Okay, let's hear what those are. If I ask you to meet me on the tennis court and show up with a hunting rifle, we may end up playing a sport of sorts, but it certainly will not be tennis. No, because tennis is a certain convention about how to do that which is contained in tennis. You can use everything you want, and it's not like tennis is some objective thing that exists in the world. It's a human construct. It's a technique that is based on, well, this is what you do, and if you do it otherwise, I'm not going to participate. But there's no one who says you should do it in this fashion. You could do it, but people would just reject you, possibly, right? Or maybe you have improved tennis to something better, right? When I ask you to meet me on a tennis court for a game, implicit in that request is an acceptance of the rules of tennis. Why? There isn't. There isn't an acceptance of the rules. There isn't. It's your interpretation. Well, I say there's no acceptance of the rules, right? You only know if someone is accepting the rules if they are not breaking the rules. As soon as they break the rules, they are no longer accepting the rules, right? You can't say that you're accepting the rules in beforehand. You have to play the whole game to see if whether or not the rules have been accepted. Historically, those engaged in ethical debating have often failed to maintain this basic reality. Well, would you mind give me some examples? I cannot submit a scientific paper written in my own personal language. Why not? You are doing that exact same thing here. You are bringing in terms universally preferable behavior and throwing all over the place of philosophy, and then saying you are creating something. You are doing exactly that. It's not a scientific paper, it's a philosophical paper. So what? You're using parts of your own personal language, claiming that it has been referred to something that is sort of both old and new, combining old and new by controlling new terms and then steering the debate in the direction you want to go. Claiming that it has been referred by my psychic goldfish and expect to be taken seriously. Similar, I cannot start a philosophical debate on ethics with reference to my own personal values and claim that my arguments have all been validated by Trixie, the omniscient and invisible leprechaun, and expect to be taken seriously. I mean, these kinds of, these weird psychedelic Monty Python-like arguments are unnecessarily weird, right? My arguments have all been validated by Trixie, the omniscient and invisible leprechaun. Well, why do you need to say things like that? It seems like it feels like it's a joke, right? I cannot start a philosophical debate on ethics with reference to my own personal values. Why can't you do that? Why can't you? You're saying you can't, but I don't know why you can't. I think you can. My personal values, my subjective experience of elephant. That's all I have. I have my subjective experience of elephant. I don't know if you experience whatever it is that is out there, right? So I have to stay with my own subjective experience. And that might be whether or not I'm hungry or I want to sleep. I want to, take a walk, whatever. But it's my subjective experience. Why are you so focused on destroying any kind of subjective experience as being bad or, untrustworthy or the subjective? It's a no, we can't go there. It has to be objective, and I'm going to tell you what is objective, right? The very act of debating requires an acceptance of universally preferable behavior. Now we are getting to it, right? The very act of debating. So where did we talk about debate? Is it implicit in your writing that this is debating? You're debating with yourself, right? So you can't use your own arguments with yourself as an example of a debate. So there's debate there. I can't find other debate. I cannot start a philosophical debate. So this is a negation of what debate isn't. So we can use that as a definition of what is a debate. So you call this, you're talking about, Trixie and all sorts of weird stuff, right? That's a debate. The very act of debating requires an acceptance of universally preferable behavior. There's no way to rationally respond to an ethical argument without exhibiting UPB. I don't buy this. This is not an argument, right? This is not an argument. This is just word manipulation, right? You have thrown around universally and preferable behavior so many times that the reader has sort of been programmed, you could say, to accept that there is universality and preferability and behaviors, and then you're just combining to say you can't talk about ethical arguments without proving exhibiting UPB, and this way you try to establish a bridge over a Hume's is-or gap. Well, I don't buy it, right? And particularly for all these reasons that I mentioned here, UPB so far, right? There are no standout definitions. Terms are equating. That new terms brought in without explanation. You're using your titles, words, universal, U and P and B thrown in and can only be seen as a way of manipulating already established terms to get a new meaning, so you control the meaning, right? There are no distinction between subjective and objective that is clear, right? There's no explanations of anything, basically. It's sort of, there are explanations, but they are, they are put in here and there and there and there. So it's sort of a big puzzle where all the pieces are just spread out on the floor, and you're saying, look, there it is, UPB. There's no, and the definition of truth is so extremely bad that nobody can use it. Nobody should use it. I should warn people to use this kind of definition of truth. It cannot work. It's so complicated and convoluted. It's a disgrace to the idea of truth, right? A lot of terms are being referred to as being objective, while it is ridiculous to call them. So you're talking about criteria being objective, or methods, or debating can be objective, whatever, or at least that's this notion I get, right? You're sort of, if I experience an elephant or dreamt of an elephant last night, it's subjective, and where are these borders between these things, right? Let us now turn to a series of positive proofs for UPB. Okay. One of the central challenges faced by modern philosophers is the need to prove that moral rules are both possible and universal. Okay, is that a reference to Hume? What do you mean by universal? Until moral rules can be subjected to the same rigor and logic as any other proposition. But now you're saying that you have a cognitive ability towards morality. If you're saying that it can be subjected to rigor of law as any other proposition, a proposition is something that is a reference to something that can be objective. You wouldn't propose something that can't be objective. Why would you? Then you're just talking to yourself, right? So if you're proposing something, it must be something that can potentially be objective. Something that only goes in your mind cannot be objective. Maybe you can agree on, thinking, and see, I'm thinking the same way, but then you're artificially agreeing on something that is not, it's not objective, right? It's not something that is out in the world like an elephant that you agree upon, where you have sense data to agree upon, right? Or basing the agreement on. Until moral rules can be subjected to the same rigor and logic as any other propositions, we will forever be stymied by subjectivism. What is this subjectivism? Freaking explain yourself. Political prejudices and the pragmatic argument from effect. The argument from effect? You haven't explained that either. What is pragmatism now, right? Political pressure. Now we are talking politics. Where did that come from all of a sudden, right? The closest historical analogy to our present situation occurred in the 15th and 16th centuries. Now we are going into history lessons. Have you studied history by any chance? Well, have you? During the rise of the scientific method, the early pioneers who advocated a rational and empirical approach to knowledge faced the same prejudices that we face today. Oh, there are bad people out there who want to attack. They want to attack my ethics. Beware, beware of the devils. All the same irrationalities, entrenched powers of church and state, mystical and subjective absolutes, and early educational barriers. Those who advocated the primacy of rationality and empirical observation over biblical fundamentalism and secular tyrannies faced the determined opposition of those wielding both cross and sword. Whoa, he is absolutely in his element when he can throw around words like this, right? He's very good at manipulating words. Take that as a pointer. He's good at manipulating words. Do you want someone who has a strong, strong, logical, structured way of thinking philosophy? Or do you want somebody who's good at manipulating words to tell you about ethics? Which one do you want? There are no definitions. There's no, descriptions. When he just throws around words as he sees fit, and then he's, sort of this. Those who advocated the primacy of rationality and empirical observation over biblical fundamentalism and secular tyrannies faced the determined opposition of those wielding both cross and sword. Many were tortured to death for their intellectual honesty. We face less risk and so should be far more courageous in advocating what is true or what is believed. In order to attack false moralities, we must start from the beginning, just as the first scientists did. Okay, let's start at the beginning. By definitions, okay? No, not definitions. Or metaphysics, anything like that. No, we start with Francis Bacon. Did not argue that the scientific method was more efficient than prayer, Bible text, or starvation-induced visions. He simply said that if we want to understand nature, we must observe nature and theorize logically, and there is no other route to knowledge. Now, science is knowledge. Is that what you're trying to say? Francis Bacon was one of the early proponents of the scientific method. He wrote a book called Novum Organum, which was what's it called when an improvement of Aristotle, so you could say, right? It was sort of the proto-scientific method. So you say there's no other route to knowledge than scientific method. Is that what you're trying to say? Because scientific method is not knowledge. This is so unbelievably stupid. It's so fucking, you don't even understand what science is. You don't even understand what knowledge is. Right? Why don't you stick to your, prose instead of doing philosophy? Talk about these empirical observations, biblical fundamentalisms, and sword in hand, I'm going to slay the beast. Why don't you write fairy tales instead of doing philosophy? Because you don't know what you're talking about. You have no fucking clue what you're talking about. Science is not knowledge. Science is based on knowledge, right? It's based on knowledge and a memory of knowledge. It's based on knowledge. You can't do science without going out and testing things and observing objective stuff, which is based on knowledge, right? Science doesn't give you knowledge. You have to observe things to get knowledge, and then you do science afterwards and say, I'm going to predict that the future is going to be like this if this is the case. If these things are the case, then things will behave like this. That's not knowledge. That's a theory. That's a crystal ball, right? The knowledge was when you looked at the elephant and say, I'm going to propose that elephants in the future are going to be like this. They're going to have trunks. They're going to be gray. They're going to say funny sounds. They're going to walk around in Africa and so on, right? That's science. But that's not the object, right? The object is a freaking elephant. Oh, man. We must take the same approach in defining and communicating morality. We must begin using the power and legitimacy of the scientific method to prove the validity and universality of moral laws. We must start from the beginning. Why have you waited 38 pages to start from the beginning? Why? We must take the same approach in defining and communicating morality. Okay, what's the difference between ethics and morality? Do you have are you just equating the words, or or are there a difference? Is there a difference? We must begin using the power and legitimacy of the scientific method to prove the validity and universality of moral laws. You can't do that. Science is not about morality. These are two different things, right? This is so much bullshit. I can hardly believe it, right? Any reader who arrives at this point, I urge you not to take this man seriously. He is a crazy person. He does not know what he's talking about. He's a complete goof. He's a complete, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a joke. This is ridiculous, right? He's an insult to both science and morality. We must start from the beginning, build logical, and reject any irrational or non-empirical substitute for truth, for the truth. The truth. Now there's only one truth. How many truths are there that you can combine into this one truth? What is this, the truth? When you're talking about little truth, middle truth, and large truth or great truth, and then this double whammy of a truth definition you also made. What does this look like in practice? All we have to do is establish the following axioms. Why? Why is that all we have to do? How do we explain that? You can't just throw it up in the air. There are only these 3 ways to do it. Why? Why? Are you just pulling them out of your ass or what? Morality is a valid concept. Because you say so, or what? Because you say so. Of course, Mr. Molyneux, he's the big philosopher guy. He's going to tell the minions this is valid. Morality is not a concept, right? An elephant is a concept. A lamp is a concept, right? North American beardless dude is a concept, right? It's not a concept, so it can't be a valid concept because morality is not a concept. Moral rules must be consistent for all mankind. Moral rule must be consistent for all mankind. Mankind, do you mean any individual? But why wouldn't it? I mean, what are you talking about? Consistent? The rule must be consistent. So if you make a rule, what would make it inconsistent for some people rather than other people? If you made a moral rule, let's say you have proposed or defined, I should say, a moral rule, what would make it inconsistent? That must be something within the rule that is inconsistent. Then it's not that it's inconsistent for mankind, then it's the rule itself that's inconsistent, or there's some internal problem of some kind. Otherwise, I don't understand this axiom. And also, this is the first time I think he mentions axioms. and I don't find morality is a valid concept. That's not an axiom. I mean, I'm having a hard time attaching the understanding of axiom to a sentence like morality is a valid concept. Moral rules must be consistent for all mankind. But isn't it enough to say moral rules must be consistent? But why do you need to add that for all mankind? What about beavers or airplanes? Are they not a part of this moral rule? If it's my airplane and you are going to, fly in it without my permission, isn't airplanes a part of the story also? I mean, I'm just asking, right? The validity of a moral theory is just by its consistency. No. Consistency is not enough to validate a moral theory. I mean, what are you saying? You can make a banana is yellow, is consistent to some degree, right? So it's a moral theory. If I say that's a moral theory, it's consistent, so it must be a valid moral theory. It's bullshit. Consistency is not enough to, you have to establish a moral theory. Maybe that's what you're doing in the two other axioms, but it is still this fluffiness that you are sort of farting in the wind and thinking that you are creating something. It has to be so solid. It has to be like the philosophy done until now must inevitably lead to what you're describing here, that people say this is just a condensation of everything that is written until now. But now you're bringing in sort of all sorts of morality is a valid concept. But what is that? You haven't proven that morality is a valid concept, so you can't just stick some axiom out in the room without explaining why you. Otherwise, I have to see it as you're just pulling it out of your a-hole, right? To start from the very beginning, not just the beginning, but the very beginning. Are moral rules or universally preferable human behaviors? Oh, that's moral rules. So he has connected the dots. It's perfect. He has connected the dots. So now he controls everything. Now he is in full control of, because he has manipulated the words into becoming universally preferable behavior. So, and if you argue against him, he's right? There's nothing we can do now. He has total control. It's word manipulation. This has nothing to do with philosophy or ethics, for that matter, right? Valid at all. There are only two possibilities when it comes to moral rules, just as there are in any logical science. Either universal moral rules are valid or they are not. You are leading the question. You're stating that universal moral rules is a fact, is sort of, this is, we don't have to discuss that, but you haven't proven universal moral rules. You're just saying it. What is that foundation where you started off with no ethics and then you started a framework from no ethics? Now you're just talking about moral rules as they're already valid, but you haven't proven that validity, right? So you're just jumping from not having morality or ethics and then saying, well, it's here. It arrived. So in physics, the question is either universal physical rules are valid or they are not. So you're equating making moral rules with scientific method. And you're trying to attach the scientific method to something that is purely a mental construct. You are a crazy person. You do not know what you're talking about. You should refute, what is it called? Take this garbage book of ethics back, remove it from the world and say, I'm going to have to, it's dangerous, don't use my UPB, right? A rule can be valid if it exists empirically, like gravity, or because it is true, like the equation 2 + 2 = a rule is valid if it exists empirically. You can see a rule. What is the matter with you? You should be in a mental asylum, right? You can't see a rule. A rule is something that is made up in human beings' minds. You can't see Newton's law out there. Oh, there's Newton's law, right? Are you fucking crazy? Are you kidding me? What's the matter with you? We must then first ask, do moral rules exist at all? Okay. Finally. Certainly not in material reality. Okay, so now what reality then? Because you just say up here, a rule can be valid if it exists empirically. I need to, this is good stuff. This is going to be good. I have to take this out and keep it for safekeeping to later, and sort of maybe make a deeper dive into it, just so I remember. Certainly not in material reality, which does not contain or obey. Hang on a sec. Which does not contain or obey a single moral rule. Now something is obeying? What is that? This is fun. Oh, certainly not in material reality, which does not contain or obey a single moral rule. I can't understand this. Okay, we'll try again. Okay, from the beginning. A rule can be valid if it exists empirically. Are there any other kinds of existence? Like gravity, but gravity doesn't exist. Gravity doesn't exist. What color does gravity have? What sound does it have? What taste does it have? It doesn't have any of that. It's an artificial mental explanation to combine behaviors into something that is predictable, right? And then we add the term gravity to this sort of behavior and say, if you look at things this way, we can call it gravity, and it will always behave this way according to our crystal ball, right? Or because it is true, like the equation 2 + 2 is 4. We must then ask, do moral rules exist at all? Certainly not in material reality. So there's existing empirically, and then there's material reality. Are those the same things we're talking about? Which does not contain or obey a single moral rule. So reality doesn't obey a moral rule. Nope. Obey. I'm just dumbfounded by this. Obey. It's like it's an individual. Why are you using that term obey? So what you're trying to say is, as far as I understand, is what is out there, which is not an individual, a human being or a thinking thing or whatever, can't be manipulated, can't be controlled, can't work from or change actions according to a moral principle. It will just do what it does. A stone rolling down a hill will roll down a hill no matter what moral theory you have. I will grant you that. Okay. Moral rules are different from the rules of physics. Okay, so why are you equating scientific method and moral rules? Just as the scientific method is different from gravity. Matter innately obeys gravity. Or the second law of thermodynamics. But thou shalt not murder is nowhere inscribed in the nature of things. Well, I guess, yeah. Physical laws describe the behavior of matter, but do not contain a single prescription. No, that's why we are doing ethics. We have to think it out. We can't observe it, right? That's the hard part. We have to think about things that are also potentially objective and combining subjective understandings of definitions of moral behavior, or whatever you want to call it. That's the job. That's the hard part, right? Science says that matter does behave in a certain manner, never that it should behave in a certain manner. No, but that's why we build bridges, because nature won't build a bridge for us when we need it. So we need to control nature. So we are changing nature in according to our imaginations, but that those changes in nature might have detrimental effect on other individuals. And maybe that's the borderline where you have to look for morality. A theory of gravity proves that if you push a man off a cliff, he will fall. It doesn't prove it, right? Proofs is what you do to verify a theory, right? A theory, if you apply a theory to a situation, the theory will, spurt out a result that is built into the theory, right? It doesn't prove it. Proof is what you do to verify a theory or validate a theory. So just keep your terms straight, right? It will not tell you whether you should push him or not. Absolutely. Thus, it cannot be said that moral rules exist in material reality, and neither are they automatically obeyed like the laws of physics, which does not mean that moral laws are false, subjective, or irrelevant. The scientific method itself does not exist in reality either, and is also optional, but it is not at all so false, subjective, or irrelevant. I'm not sure where he's trying to go with this. I feel like I'm being manipulated. If we can prove that moral theories can be objective, rational, and verified, rationality has nothing to do with objective. It has nothing to do with objective. Verifiable, what is that? How do we verify moral theories? Is that the whole course we have done until now that you're trying to? So the last 38 pages has been how to verify moral theories. Is that what you're saying now? Because then I'm confused on an extremely high plane with regards to my, all this I've pointed out here, that there's no, it's such a big mess that I can't use it, right? This will provide the same benefits to ethics that subjecting physical theories to the scientific method did. Now I feel like you're equating things. So just to make it sound authoritarian, you are pulling in this scientific method. So people say, oh no, I can't challenge the scientific method. Oh, the whole academia, oh no. So they are saying, oh yes, you scientific method, Mr. Science, you are telling me about morality, right? Before the rise of the scientific method, people believed that matter obeyed the subjective whims of gods and devils, and people believe the same of morality now. Okay, how do you know? Volcanoes erupted because the mountain god was angry. Good harvest resulted from human and animal sacrifice. No one believed the absolute physical laws could limit the will of the gods, and so science could never develop. Those who historically profited from defining physical reality as subjective, mostly priests and aristocrats, fought the subjugation of physical theories to the scientific method, just as those who currently profit from defining morality as subjective. Could you elaborate on that? Those who profit from defining morality as subjective. Could you elaborate on these subjective moralities? That would be nice. That would be interesting to understand what you don't just hint at it and then move on. Explain it. Mostly priests and politicians currently fight the subjugation of moral theory to objective and universal principles. As mentioned above, the scientific method is essentially a methodology for separating accurate from inaccurate theories by subjecting them to two central tests: logical, consistent, and empirical observation, and by always subjugating logical consistency to empirical observation. If I propose a perfectly consistent logical theory that says that a rock will float up when thrown off a cliff, any empirical test proves my theory incorrect, since observation always trumps hypothesis. Yes, but you have to do the test, right? Just because somebody did the test 60 years ago doesn't mean that it's necessarily the case now. If you want knowledge or insight, the knowledge is the stone, right? You are throwing, and your hand and yourself or whatever. But the theory isn't true because somebody proved it 10 years ago. That is saying, if I proved it 10 years ago, it must be. That's a stretch. If you are a skeptic, you have to adhere to Hume's critique of causality, that just because something happened in the past doesn't mean it must happen in the future, right? You have to make the same observation in the now. And even if you do that, that's no proof that it's going to happen tomorrow. Science is still an inference. It's not knowledge. It's an inference that says, I think this is going to be the case also tomorrow because it was the case today or yesterday or so. I mean, right? Is that step, I'm going to take the chance that the bridge will hold, right? I'm going to take the chance that because the ice is 18 centimeters thick, it's going to hold my car if I drive over it, right? That's the kind of theory, but it's not the knowledge of what is happening is only available when you are actually experiencing it, right? You need to be very clear on this. Because a moral judgment must be based on some kind of objectivity. And objectivity is only possible between two or more individuals in the now when you experience it. Otherwise, it's not objective because you don't have the sense data, right? Okay, how far did I get? A further aspect of the scientific method is the belief that since matter is composed of a combination of atoms with common, stable, and predictable properties, I'm not so sure that they're that stable, but okay. The behavior of matter must also be common, stable, and predictable. Thus, experiments must be reproducible in different locations and times. I cannot say that my rock floating theory is correct for just one particular rock and all the day I first tested it, or at a single location. My theories must describe the behavior of matter, which is universal, common, and stable and predictable. So now he's going to use the scientific method to prove his moral theory. It's bullshit. Finally, there's a generally accepted rule, sometimes called Occam's razor, which states that of any two theories that have the same predictive power, the simpler of the two is preferable. I agree. I might have used some other words to describe it, but fine. Prior to the Copernican revolution, when Earth was considered the center of the universe, the retrograde motion of Mars, when Earth passed its orbit around enormous problems with the Ptolemaic system of astronomical calculation, circles within circles multiplied enormously, which were all cleared away by simply placing the sun at the center of the solar system and accepting the elliptical nature of planetary orbits. It's interesting that we are talking about something being parsimonious. The simpler explanation is the more preferred. I encourage you, Mr. Author, to look into idealism. And idealism gets rid of what is called the hard problem of consciousness, which is an artifact of bad metaphysics. People all over the world are studying this problem because you can't get from atoms to the color red, right? That's a problem. You're not addressing this hard problem of consciousness. You might not even be aware that those who have the same kind of materialist or dualist worldview that you seem to have realized there is this problem with the hard problem of consciousness, right? And there's also the problem of other minds. If you say you have access to an external world of which I'm a part, why don't you experience my experience? You experience everything except my experience, but you can experience your own experience. Why is that? Well, idealism removes that problem because idealism doesn't say that it encompasses other minds, right? It's disconnected from other minds, right? Doesn't mean you can't do ethics or metaphysics or epistemology on these things. That's a fallacy, right? That's an incorrect thinking. So you might want, if you want to, accept this rule called Occam's razor, I urge you to look into idealism. Thus, any valid scientific theory must be A, universal, B, logical, C, empirical verifiable, D, reproducible, E, as simple as possible. Okay, let's do it. The methodology for judging and proving a moral theory is exactly the same as the methodology for judging and proving any other theory. No, bullshit. And I pointed it out earlier. This is bullshit. All right. Okay. I think we have past 1 hour, and we are going into more rules, definition, and 5 proofs. So I guess this is a good point to take a break, and I'll see you in the next part. Have a nice day.